I like it. Jay, anything for mum-in-law?
Yeah, actually, I know we've spoken a bit about it in the past, Claire, but I don't think we've actually had a full-on conversation. I'd like to bring Az into it as well, partly off the back of what you just said, years of wisdom and everything. And also, you're saying about the fly going through the door and the connection that made with Lauren and I, for instance, and the rest is history. I wanted to actually talk to you about your generation or your experience with your mum, bless her, Pat, and the war. We've never really talked about the war, have we, Az?
We have not talked about the war.
So I feel there's like a generation gap between, say, my generation and the war. So like my parents were a bit older than yourself, Claire, and they are sort of connected to the people that were connected in the war. And what was your past experience with all of that and growing up? What have you got to say about that, Claire?
It's an interesting one. Of course, when you become your own nan, which I have in the last sort of 10 years, you suddenly hear yourself reacting to the younger generations the same as your grandparents did. But of course, I grew up with parents and grandparents. My parents were born in 1925. And having a German Jewish refugee as a father who came out of Berlin in 1939, and a mum that lived at 13 years of age through the Blitz in the East End of London, they weren't privileged. They couldn't understand privilege at all and having stuff. And I mean, a roast chicken when we grew up was posh. If you got a roast chicken on Sunday, that was really, really loads of food. We were brought up never to waste and things like that, but they never talked about the war. My father never talked about his terrible experiences and his parents dying in concentration camps and things like that, being Jewish. And mum never talked about being hard up. She talked about coming out of the war and being so in control of her life that she knew exactly where she was going and exactly what she wanted out of life, because it was so different from what she'd had as a teenager. So we grew up to, and were told to appreciate things, appreciate everything you have, but we weren't at all privileged, and we didn't feel privileged. My generation, my mum knitted our jumpers, and then when they got too small, she unpicked them and re-knitted them. Now that's my generation. They didn't have more than one outfit for church on Sunday when they grew up, and they shared eggs during the war. One egg was shared between two kids. So now I look at the generations today, and everyone has a mobile phone and everyone has technology, and you can go to Primark and buy for 50 quid a whole winter wardrobe, which, I feel it's quite privileged. Most people, there are a lot of people still in poverty in the UK, but most people are really privileged, and the children don't understand. But why should they? It's not their fault. So I don't think that I shouldn't make my grandchildren hungry because that's what my parents went through. I shouldn't re-knit their jumpers and make them look odd at school because it's not right. But you've got to understand that every generation and our children's generation will look back on their childhood in a different way, exactly the same as I do. But it doesn't mean to say we shouldn't talk about it.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I asked was because I did a post this week. It was actually a share. Someone else had done a post, and it was they were listing all the things. If you were born in 1900, you would have gone through the two wars. You would have gone through the Spanish flu. You would have gone through all of these number of things before you were even of any age. And it was just sort of bringing a bit of perspective to how things are now and the way that people are behaving, toilet roll, for an example, during this whole pandemic.
I totally understand what you're saying, and I liked the post that you put for awareness, but you cannot tell a 12-year-old child today how it feels to be hungry any more than they can experience being starving. And I always say to the kids, your children and the other children, there are children now in India that feed themselves from rubbish tips. Now, I can tell them till I'm blue in the face, they're never going to experience that. But you see pictures of Indian children, 3 years old, holding their 2-year-old brothers and sisters on rubbish tips, eating food that's left over. So how can that be possible in this day and age, in this world, So it is a very unfair world. And our children mostly are very privileged, particularly the ones that come to the karate, the fact that they can afford to go to karate. And so we have to just understand that life isn't fair. And anyone who thinks life is fair is wrong. You don't know where you're going to be born. You are born, and it's not your fault where you are born. Whether you're royalty, you can't have any control over that. But people do change. So you've got to have an open mind, and you've got to be open to change. And as parents and grandparents, we've got to tell our children, open your minds and think about different things. Don't just believe what your parents believe. Have your own thoughts, but give your kids freedom of thought. Don't give them barriers. Don't indoctrinate them with religion or anything like that. If you're a vegetarian, say to your kids, try meat. This is why I have only veg, because I think it's better for me. Go on the internet, research why I am a vegetarian. Don't tell kids what they should do, because that causes conflict.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about it, because obviously you've got the experience of being a mother and then being a grandmother. So you've seen a lot more of that. And I really like what you're saying about, because it's still a parent's job, isn't it, to guide a child and to give them direction and to try to teach them, you know, morality and right from wrong and all the rest of it. But like you said, it's without kind of placing your own personal dogma on them, that they're then entrenched in one way of thinking, because then, like you said, they end up closed-minded. And I know, JC, you made that post in relation to everything that's going on with COVID at the moment, and a lot of people, I guess, struggling to get to grips with things like wearing a mask and social distancing, and maybe they lack the perspective. Do you think it's something in the education system that needs to change for kids to kind of have a more open thing, or do you think it's more at home rather than at the schools?
Is that for me?
That's for you, Claire. That's for you. That's for you.
You're our guest. Everything's for you, Claire.
Well, it depends where you're educated, of course. So
Sure.
The choice of school for your children is extremely important. When you are placing your kids in education system, it has to fit with your lifestyle, number one. So you don't send a child to a school that doesn't suit their local community, their beliefs and things like that. So I totally believe in open-mindedness and telling your children that they have a right to their own thoughts, that you can make a child very odd. So a friend of mine in Crawley sent her little lad to a private school and asked me, you know, do you think it's the right thing? Because I want the best for my son. And his father went to a private school. And I said, that's totally up to you. I said, but he will not have friends down the road in the street. He will not be invited to birthday parties locally, because you are sending him a long way away to private school. He got a very good education, but he wasn't the brightest kid. And he wasn't the privileged child that would have parents that would suddenly find him a job in a bank, etc., etc. He's doing really well, but he didn't do that straight private school, straight into a job, you know, with loads of money. He struggled. And, you know, his mum said to me recently, I totally understand what you meant about it. She's still glad he's had the really good education, but there are things that she could have done differently, thinking about sending someone, and vice versa. And my husband was bright, and he went to a grammar school, and he lived on a council estate, and he really struggled going to the grammar school, but living on the council estate. He had to come back to all the kids that went to the local school, and he was lucky, but it made him a different sort of person. He wasn't bullied, he became tough to survive it. So just consider the school you're sending your children and the effect it will have on them. And it could be good or bad, but really think about the education, because it's not schools that make your children. It's parents' job to bring their children up and get them the education and the knowledge, because it's your choice where your kids go, not theirs.